Hi, I'm Kent.
And I'm Anna.
We're married, we make movies, and we believe that anyone in any circumstance can make a feature film.
Welcome to the Feature Filmmaker Podcast. If you want a career making movies, you're in the right place.
Hit subscribe to never miss an episode.
Let's jump right in. Hey, John, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
So we're excited to have Jonathan Bregel. You go by John.
Either or, John works.
All right. Anna kept saying, I think you're saying it wrong because everyone keeps calling him John, but we've always seen your name as Jonathan, written out full.
Yeah, I had a name identity crisis, so that's the whole story.
Maybe we'll get into that. Anyway, so we're having Jonathan Bregel on the podcast today, who is a founder of the production company Variable, who's done some really high-end work in the commercial space for a lot of big brands. And he's also done some really beautiful documentary work on his own. And we're excited to have him talk about his approach to the craft and get into some of his story. And then we'll see where the conversation goes from there. So thanks for being here, John.
Yeah, did we miss anything in that?
Thank you for having me.
In that intro?
I think, so Variable is no longer a production company. Like, we haven't produced a project in, almost 5 years now.
Wow.
So just recently we reopened the doors as a wellness community, but the production is sort of on the back burner right now.
Yeah. So will you tell us a little bit about that story, how that all got started, how you got into this, what's your background?
Sure. Yeah. So I got into film making through skateboard videography. It's like an old traditional story of like, dad has a camera and find it and start making videos with my friends. And it was always just like something fun to do with my friends, making skate videos. And I actually ended up breaking my wrist when I was in 9th grade, like 2 times, like back to back. So it was the ball, I want to say like 3/4 of high school, I was in a cast. And so that kind of defaulted me as like the filmer of my group of skateboarding friends. Like, I wasn't like super duper into it before that happened, but then that happened, and most of my friends were skateboarders. So just like, and my friends, they progressed so quickly. Like, they were jumping down so many stairs. So where the time that I could get back on a skateboard, it was like I couldn't even keep up with them anymore. So I just chose the camera essentially, or the camera chose me. I don't know. but by the time I was in, I want to say 11th grade, I had this really great photography teacher in high school, and he was just amazing, like an amazing mentor to so many of us and my friends. And he saw like my interest for filmmaking and kind of got me to start thinking of filmmaking in more terms of like storytelling, which for me, it was never about storytelling. It was more about just making a video, showing people a good time, giving people an experience, which essentially is storytelling, one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But I didn't have any understanding of like how to tell a story. And so he, encouraged me to get into it a little bit more. He even made like an award for me when I graduated high school for like the video art award, which was like pretty cool. So I felt a little bit special. And so, when it came time to go to high school or college, I was just like, I don't know what else I want to do. It seems like I'm getting some like support, and I got hired to do some little odd jobs for like this local realtor in the area, and I interned at this local documentary production company in Maryland. And I was like, I guess you can make money doing this, I guess. And so I ended up going to film school, and fortunately, I fell in love with it when I was in film school, because it was a big question mark. Because like I said, like I even up until the time I was in film school, I didn't consider myself a filmmaker at all. And I wasn't interested in like Hollywood films. I didn't aspire to make Hollywood films. I just knew that I like to make videos, more or less videos is what I would say. And so when I got to film school and met a bunch of other people that were really passionate about filmmaking, it was really cool. It was really fortunate, and we connected, and I had a lot of natural curiosity, and I always wanted to make things. That's just what I still to this day, that's what it comes down to. And I just made a lot of things throughout my time at film school. I was like producing passion projects, DPing them, music videos. Ended up getting a couple budgets to do music videos while I was still in film school, which was pretty cool. And I was like, you know what, like this is really awesome, like this is, it sort of felt like it came naturally to me in film school, just like the process. It didn't feel like a struggle, it was just like, this is something that my skill set and who I am just sort of lent to. And a lot of it was the people too. Like I had really great friends in film school, a lot of whom I still work to this day. And so, yeah, I graduated film school. I had a cinematography reel, had some like producing experience, and ended up moving to New York City with a few of my friends right after film school. And that is, I guess, chapter 3. Should I keep going or?
Keep going.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah. We haven't even gotten to like, variable or anything yet. So
This is great.
Right. So yeah, I guess the context of all that is because film school is where I met all the people that helped turn variable into what it was. And so when I graduated film school, moved to New York City, there was 4 people that were in my class. We all ended up moving into the same apartment together in New York City, and would all work on different jobs and all freelancing. I had like a semi-permanent job shooting news at the United Nations for this like Saudi Arabian television station, which was really, really strange. There's probably a lot of interesting topics in that in itself, but I'll fast forward through that. But essentially what we found was that like we were always the most fulfilled when we were shooting projects with one another. And the problem was we never made any money on those projects. We would just get budget, say like a $15,000 budget for music video. Like there was a record label that I worked a lot with, and they would give us these like $10,000 to $15,000 budgets, which now is a lot, but back then for music video that was like low. This was like 13 years ago or something like that. And so we would put all the money into the music videos, make a great end product, and not have made any money off of it. So it's kind of like, that was great, but it was just like kind of, man, it would be great if we could make some money off of these jobs. And so we'd produced a lot of work. It was myself and another cinematographer named Khalid Mutasib, who I went to film school with. And, we reached a point where we weren't making money on those jobs. And I was personally not feeling much of a connection at all to the industry. And the people, like the producers that I was working with on a lot of the jobs that you kind of have to do to break in. But I didn't, I was just, my whole, like the first year of being in New York City was just, I was like, man, is this really it? Is this what I signed up for? And I was just questioning a lot about it, because it was just like, as it is when you're breaking in, it's just like crazy hours. There was a lot of shisty producers. It just didn't feel like a space where I felt like I could live true to who I am and like how I was raised. And I was just sort of like, I don't know, questioning, big question marks. And there were no signs of it getting any better at the time either. So, and my other friend, Khalid, his qualm at the time was that, the work that we were producing was always very high quality, and he wasn't happy with the quality of the work that he was able to produce as a freelancer at that phase of his career. So we started talking more seriously about starting a production company. And again, the challenge was always we weren't able to make money doing it. We didn't really have like the business mind. So there was a third partner named Tyler Ginter, who he was in the military at the time. And he had been observing like the work that Khalid and I had been producing, and our other friends from film school. And he'd been following it for like a couple of years. And his time in the military was almost up, or when he decided he wanted to get out, because he was pretty burnt out by it. And he has a business mind, and he saw what we were doing. And, we just started the discussion of like, what would this look like if Tyler came into the mix and was able to take on more of like an EP producer role? Granted, he didn't have any experience as an EP or a producer, but he had, been deploying troops around the world because he was the captain of the combat camera department in the military. So we're like, if this guy can deploy troops around the world and in war zones, that sounds a lot like the film industry. So like, that was our like instinct, you know. It was like, this guy can, if he can do that. And he had like sold contracts for like a lot, like camera companies and like big deal stuff. And so he came into the mix, and from there we all just traveled. We would bring each other on every job that we could at that season, you know, whether I was like cam opping or Khalid was cam opping or Tyler was DITing or whatever. It didn't matter. We were just like, if one of us had an opportunity, we would drag the other two into it so that we could continue to brainstorm and develop how we were going to actually make money as a company. And so that went on for, I want to say about like 6 months or something like that, until we started being able to pitch ourselves as like a cinematography collective, more or less. For there's a few networks that we did work with, and they would hire us to come on as like a unit, hire the gaffer, hire the AC, and they just knew like, oh, if we're going to hire this team, we're going to get great visuals. So we just kind of dealt with that for a while. And then through just like strategic talking about ourselves and who we are and whatever, we managed to get some like smaller opportunities of production company. And that's where we were like, okay, we're actually doing this. And things were, you know, off to like a slow start. And then I would say we ended up getting an office in Chelsea, which was like our first big investment. And we all put, I think it was like $70,000. Like it was like all of our life savings basically and more. And we were like, okay, we're going to get an office and we're going to go shoot a few passion projects. And this is what we're going to do. And that's what we did. And this was like right around the time of Vimeo, like when Vimeo was coming out with like the staff pick program. You know, you could shoot really good looking stuff on like Reds for a pretty good price. So there was a lot of, you know, and phantom cameras were like more available and I don't know, stuff like that. And so, yeah, we shot a few passion projects and like, I mean, it was pretty wild, but like all of them ended up getting like staff picks, like best of the month or like that. It was like 3 in a row, basically.
Wow.
And those were our first projects that we released as like a production company. So like overnight, we just got, well, I guess basically what happened was we were in like Texas for this filmmaking event called Masters in Motion. And I got a call from Nike on my cell phone. And I was like, whoa, like this is Nike, like this is kind of crazy. You know, like that's kind of like a dream client. And like, so yeah, I was talking to them and then was telling my partners like, okay, this is happening. And it was like a branded spot with Spike Lee. Like they wanted him to be involved. There was like 2 soccer teams. There was all this crazy stuff that they wanted to do. And so like overnight, we basically became a commercial production company without any experience producing commercials.
Wow.
And so that was, and then like as that was wrapping or during the process, I don't remember exactly when, National Geographic emailed us based off of like one of the staff picks that they saw, and they wanted us to start doing their promo work. So then now all of a sudden we're working with network TV, and then it all sort of just snowballed from there. And that's that. I guess maybe that's chapter 1.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So my question is like, at that point, was there like a ton of excitement? Were you guys feeling like, were you in the mind of like, this is what I'm going to just keep doing? Like, I'm just going to keep making these. This is really great. You know, this is successful. Or did you have something else that you were like, either that wasn't feeling right, or did you have something else that you dreamt of doing still, or was that kind of the ticket at the point at that time?
I mean, with Nike calling my phone, like that was just like, you know, I thought maybe in like 10 years I would do a Nike commercial, you know? And so there was a ton of excitement. Like we're like, oh my gosh, we can't screw this up. You know, like let's go all in. And then Nat Geo, which has been my dream client since I picked up camera or whatever. I was like, oh my God, we can't screw this up. And that kind of became the MO.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a ton of excitement, really. A ton of excitement and like figuring things out, really.
That's awesome.
So your career exploded and you got all these huge jobs. And how did you go from that to this wellness community that you've created now? Like what steered you that direction?
Oh man. I feel like, yeah, it exploded. And that is pretty much what happened. Like at the time, I don't know if it actually, because the explosion happened over the period of like years. Like
Yeah.
it just constantly kept exploding for better or worse. Now I know if something explodes like that, like that's a point for me to actually pause and be like, can I actually sustain this? Like, because I was in like full on reactive, I was 22 at the time.
Wow.
Now I'm 33, so I have a bit more experience than I did back then. But yeah, I forget what your question was.
How did that move you into health and wellness?
The current iteration of Variable.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because I was just sort of like chasing the excitement and like the passion, and we brought on, there was like 7 or 8 employees at any given time. We brought on like too much overhead too quickly.
Mm.
And these are people that are like my best friends and people that were like relying on us, and it's a lot of pressure. It's a tremendous amount of pressure.
Yeah.
And everybody was like young and hungry too, so there was that element of it as well, where it's like none of us really, we didn't have like a mentor in the business at all. Like we were too naive and honestly too spun up in the excitement of it all to even pause, at least for those first like 4 years or something like that. So kind of just kept like chasing it, and then basically had this idea that like a couple of years into it, like, if we represent other directors, like that'll release some of the burden. Because like one of our partners left after the first year, who was my creative partner in the company, Khalid, the cinematographer. He's an insanely talented cinematographer. So he went and started doing his own thing. But then all of the aftershock of that, which all the creative pressure, like what it, everything that I couldn't have anticipated would be coming, which is the treatment process and working with agencies and all that stuff, that became extremely challenging. So we were like, okay, so we started hiring on more staff, and then of course the responsibilities of like training staff while I'm like directing jobs. And then so like another year goes by, I'm like directing. We're trying to find directors who have this set of skills that we need to continue producing the type of work that we were used to creating. And that was a big challenge for sure, because like the people that we wanted to hire were, they're like, oh, 15 grand a day type like commercial directors. And, at that point, the first like few years, it was like, we couldn't pay directors that. And so it was like, you either find young directors that have a tremendous amount of potential and afford them and sort of train them up a little bit, or scale everything down. Like that's sort of the crossroads that we hit. So, naively, and, theoretically this could have worked if I knew what I knew now, but we're like, okay, we're going to start repping these directors that are like incredibly talented, but like don't have that much of commercial reels. And like, I had a pretty robust commercial reel at the time. So I started then co-directing, helping them pitch, traveling with them, building their reels so they could have legs of their own. And so that I could then take this was the plan at least, so I could take a further seat in the back and just more like creative direct and do jobs here and there. And that did eventually happen. It took way longer than I thought it was going to happen. And unfortunately, by the time it did happen, I was so toasted like so far past the point of even being able to function
Yeah.
that ultimately I ended up leaving the company. My partner and I agreed that, I would be bought out, and he would resume the company, which unfortunately, like 6 or 7 months after I left, they had a really bad string of, I think it was like, I don't know, 20 plus or 30 plus or something like that, jobs that just fell through. And so the company ultimately shut down shortly after I left. But there's much bigger reasons why that happened. I think largely because we didn't have experience, B, we didn't know how to run a production company, and C, we didn't know how to look after ourselves. I think that's the most fundamental part, which undermines the community. Is like, I didn't have any sense of like boundaries, personal boundaries. If you told me what wellness meant, I'd be like, oh yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Like, I've read about that when I was on like 30 milligrams of Adderall, but like, what is that? You know? Yeah, that's the whole other piece to it too. Like, I was medicated on like stimulants for like 4 years in the mix of that, but I was completely abusing it, like, for sure, like around the clock a lot of times. And so that definitely contributes to a lot of the lack of focus on the bigger picture, because I was always so like hyper focused on like the briefs that were in front of me. But anyway, yes, the company failed, and I think that the accountability of wellness and like knowing how important it is to take care of ourselves and look after each other, like from a holistic perspective, that highly, if not specifically, is, I mean, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It just had a lot to do with that company being unhealthy. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes total sense that that would lead to you reaching out and helping other people going through the same thing or heading down that pathway.
Mhm.
And I've loved being a part of your community and participating
Thank you.
here and there in the discussions that you're doing. I think the topics are really interesting. Yeah, I think it's a great thing you've got
Thank
going.
you.
Yeah, something you said where you said basically each individual who made up this organization, none of us, you kind of alluded that all of you were maybe so thrown into this that none of you were really taking care of yourselves, or at least a good portion of you, and that undermined the community. And I thought that was an interesting way that you said that. It reminds me of something Dallin H. Oaks said, which is that we can't have world peace until we've learned personal peace or found personal peace. And it's just this idea of how does a company find wellness? It's like, well, when each individual learns how to set healthy boundaries and how to have a healthy lifestyle and discover that wellness, then it'll naturally kind of, spill into the company culture and the dynamic. And that's true for any sort of group, I would think, be it a company or a community or a family or whatever. So anyway, I think that's really valuable. And I think that that's something that you're so not alone on. I think that's what you obviously have realized that because you've started a whole thing out of it. And so it's every film that I've ever worked on. That's how does this group work together and how do we make this work? Because one of the hardest things is making films. And one of the hardest things while learning to make films, I think, is learning how, it sounds dumb, how to make them, like how to make the process of them sustainable and just like enjoyable, and sometimes it's super enjoyable and then sometimes it's a nightmare. And I think we've experienced both of those polar sides of it. And anyway, I don't know, have you ever felt like you came off of a project and it was just like, that was really, really great, and maybe it's going to be this way from now on? Like
Ooh, and like thinking that every job is going to be like that.
I guess I'm speaking from experience, just like, oh great, I figured it out. Like it's like that's the assumption, like, oh yeah, I figured it out. We have figured it out. It's now it will be good.
I don't. I mean, I don't. I was so humbled. This was like 6 years ago when I took a 2-month sabbatical, like by myself. It was like this road trip just around the United States. And I was like meditating every day, journaling, eating well, hiking a ton, spending all my time in national parks, like the most beautiful parts of the country. And I was really burnt out before the sabbatical, and I came back and I was like, oh, I feel amazing. I'm completely healed. And I went right into this 4-city car job, which like car jobs are always stressful for me. And I had so much confidence, I guess, just like going into it, that I was okay. And then after the job itself, I slam dunked into a worse depression that I'd ever been into my life. And ever since that happened, every job, I just like try and just stay humble and try and just like not get too high, because sometimes things happen that are just outside of my control. I don't know. I haven't completely figured it out. I don't know if it's like the psychic energy, certain things. I don't know what it is, but like I'm always mindful that after a shoot, I just need to try and take care of myself, because just weird things happen. That's a big part of like what I'm trying to uncover in the community. I know recently, like, we were talking a little bit about like grieving after shoots sometimes, and just different emotions that I haven't really, and just like feeling sad sometimes. And some shoots I'll feel really happy after, some shoots I'll feel really sad after. And so I'm in a phase of my life of just like exploring those feelings when coming back from shoots. So it's all over the spectrum for me. I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, it does. It's David Sandberg who directed Shazam, and he's this really interesting guy who came here from Europe and just like got launched into Hollywood as a director. Talks about that, where he's like, I just have learned that like I'm gonna get really depressed because like you make a movie and you're just like there's so much purpose and like focus and energy, and then he says, and then the movie's over and it's just like this huge void. He's just
right,
and he's like, I just go into this big depression and I have to kind of like slow down, and like he's like I've learned to accept it, so that like when it comes it's like okay, like I don't have to go into like a crisis and get scared. I can just be like, I'm sad, I finished a movie, I'm gonna feel sad for a while now, like. And so he's really cool. I don't know if you follow his work on YouTube.
No,
but he's like one of the only A-list Hollywood directors who has like a YouTube channel, and he posts to it regularly, and he's like just wrapped on Shazam 2.
Wow.
And he's like getting back into his YouTube channel. He's like, hey, sorry, I haven't posted for a while. And it's like,
that's amazing.
So he's really cool, but he shows some really candid stuff that's really neat. But so I know that you eventually moved to China and you started doing some things there. I know you eventually got married. This is my impressions based on, I think I've read a couple interviews from you and watched some of your work. So correct me if I'm wrong, but how did that go, or did it go differently than I just explained?
What, the marriage or China?
Both.
Oh. Yeah. Well, yeah. So my wife is Chinese. She's from China. We met in China. It was at the tail end of yet another crazy car job. And we had wrapped. It was myself, my friend Alex, who was a producer at Variable, Lloyd, who was a producer at Variable, and a few of the local crew from China. And we went out for like wrap drinks at this like bar dance place kind of thing. And there was this woman dancing there that I was just like looking at, like not creepily at all, of course. But yeah, I was like never the type of guy to like go up and dance or like even say hi to someone I didn't know. That just wasn't and isn't really my thing necessarily. I mean, I do it now with like photography, but not when it comes to like whatever. You get my point.
Yeah.
So I was looking at her, and like my friend Alex, the producer, like I'd been notoriously single for years because I just prioritized work over everything. And my friend Alex was like, hey man, you see that girl dancing over on the dance floor? Like, she was just dancing by herself. And I was like, yeah, like I've been looking at her for like 30 minutes. And he's like, dude, you should go dance with her. And I was like, fine. And like, I guess Lloyd had just bought everybody shots, and I like took a shot, and I was like, wow, whatever, just be like a bro here and do this thing. And I did. And we started dancing, and she just had an awesome vibe. And, she met the people I was with. I met her roommate who she was there with. And yeah, we just like had a great vibe. And then later that night, we heard about this underground rave club in Shanghai. Just like this is not common behavior for me, but it's like, whatever. We're in Shanghai. Like, let's go to an underground rave. And apparently you have to like, this is what we heard. Like, you have to pull over on the side of a highway and walk through this massive Jersey barrier wall that has a hole blown through it with dynamite, like just like a hole blasted through this Jersey wall on the side of the highway. You walk through that, you walk down a little trail through the woods, and then there is this mansion, like this old school Chinese mansion that has a rave inside of it. And we're like, this sounds like not real, And so she hadn't heard about it. We were talking to her about it, and she was like, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about, but like, I can try and help you guys get there. So like, she helped navigate with the taxi driver for us to find this place, and it actually existed. So we like hung out like the whole night, just like dancing and hanging out. And then I had to leave 2 days later from Shanghai. So then we hung out the whole next day. And it was so special that when I got back to New York City, we were moving into a brand new office space, which was a huge commitment for us. It was like a 5-year, like some $1 million, all I remember is $1 million lease. And Dumbo, like overlooking the water. Like, we had just all the new furniture. We'd hired an interior designer. Like, we were just like, whatever, we're going all in. Let's do it. That was a decision we made, which in retrospect, it's not a great decision. I walked into the office and I had this like physical reaction that was like, you can't do this anymore. Like, you just signed your life over for the next like 2 years if you keep going forward with this. And it was the most anxiety inducing week of my life. And because that was like all I knew for the past like 8 years was like that company. And it all really boils down to the fact that I met my now wife in Shanghai, and I knew that if I stayed in the company and kept doing what I had been doing, that the relationship wouldn't work out. That's just how I felt. Whether that's completely true or not, that's just how I felt. And so I was like, you know what? I'm tired of putting work first. Like, I want to put this relationship first. And in dramatic fashion, that's what I did. And so it was like 2 weeks later, I was out of the company, and I was still directing for the company, like freelance, which was great. And I was like closing up a couple of jobs that had been going on. And then that afforded me the ability to be like, I'm moving to China, like, this is what I'm going to do. But in that time frame, like shortly after I got back from China, it was like 2 weeks after I got back, she decided to come to New York City, Chen-Ling, my wife, and visited for a couple of weeks. And then, yeah, it must have been a couple of weeks later or something like that I decided to go to China, because I was originally thinking like, oh, I'm just going to stay in New York City and but everything, I just needed a change, like a dramatic change. And so that happened, and then lived there on and off for, it was like, I don't remember how long it was. I honestly, I'm drawing a blank on it. But yeah, the longest you can stay there without a work visa is like 2 months. So I'd go for like 2 months, come back home, go for another 2 months. And that was great. And now she lives here in Baltimore, of all places, murder capital of the United States.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
From the safe city of Shanghai.
I lived in the murder capital of the world for a couple of years.
Where's that?
Well, at the time, it was San Pedro Sula, Honduras.
Wow.
Which was pretty funny. But if you're not dealing drugs, you're not likely going to become part of those statistics. But anyway, so it wasn't as scary as it sounded. But have you ever considered making your story of how you met your wife into a movie?
No, I haven't. Not at all, but it's a fun one to tell. I enjoy it. I actually I'm starting a podcast of my own through Variable, and I my goal was to get it done today. And man, it is like, maybe it's just because it's the first podcast, but I was going to include that story as a part of it. But yeah, it's a skill set for sure that is going to take time to hone, because I was like trying to record an intro for like an hour and I'm like, God, this sounds so cheesy. Like, what is wrong with this? And I'm just, anyway, but yeah, podcast, good stuff.
That's funny. That's funny. Now we've gone through a number of introductions to our podcast, so
Yeah.
maybe ours is still cheesy, but
It probably is.
Yeah.
Our motto has had to become, it's better done than perfect. You know, B minus does the job. Like,
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful.
yeah, especially with podcast content, like it's film is still hard. I can't quite get to B minus yet, but I don't know if I can't get up to it or down to it. Probably both. The podcasts are a little easier to just throw out there and not be like this one. Solid something minus. So
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. That's on our interview skills, not your
No.
your half of this. But
no worries.
So cool. I didn't know all the details about your story, but that really is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was a blessing in many ways, just like when we met and how it all transpired. But I was working with a life coach for on and off for like a couple of years before that, and she made me so aware that like what I was seeking more than anything was just to have a partner, to like have love in my life. And it was so easy for me to just like push it away with like work, and of course there's all other reasons there that my therapist knows all too well, but truly, like, just my life coach telling me that and making me aware of that was like, helped me make the decision that changed my life for the better. So
yeah.
It's good.
How long have you been married now?
Over, like 3.5 years, a little less than 3.5 years, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So still fresh.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's really good.
And do you feel like now you've found a way to approach your work that feels more balanced or feels more healthy?
Yeah, and I think mainly because like all my eggs aren't in one basket anymore, meaning production work. That for me is not a good position to be in. So yeah, I had to work really hard the last 4 years to like find different income streams, and I'm not rich by any means. Like, I think when people hear income streams, it's like, oh, that's not the case at all. I mean, to be honest, like, I'm making far less money than I was making when I was directing and working at Variable. Like, but I mean, I've been working really hard the last 4 years to make it so all of my income doesn't come just through production work. So when that was the case, it was just too much pressure for me. There's like just so many constant unknowns of like, even financially and where you're going to be and at any given time. And I think that was the biggest struggle for me, is that I felt like the rug was constantly pulled out from under me. Like, anytime I would get myself or like my wellness in like a better space, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, next week you got to be in wherever, this small town in the middle of Alaska or whatever, which is like, in theory, it's all great. And it sounds really great when you're telling people about what you do. But like, in reality, it's extremely hard it was extremely hard on my just overall wellness. So I had to work really hard to sort that out. So now, I do, the last few years, I've done a small handful of jobs every year and just been slowly building other areas to be able to make a little bit of money here and there. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
I'm also curious about your creative process. I just feel like your work has such a emotional vulnerability to it or a humanity to it that is hard to come by. And I'm curious where you think that comes from or what your process
I think
is.
specifically regarding your documentary work that you've done.
Thank you. I don't know exactly. I guess because of just, largely how I was raised. I know my mom is one of my biggest collaborators. She
Mm,
always has been. And, my parents are both very faithful people, and I grew up in the faith myself. And granted, I didn't really understand it at all. I'm just starting to understand it a little bit now. But when I
mm,
was young, I didn't understand it. But there was definitely like a set of just like values that I was raised by that I'm starting to understand. And so she would always, help guide me and give me feedback, and it was all super valid stuff. Like it wasn't like judgy. It wasn't like you're so much better than this type of work, like you
Mm.
should be doing this. It was just like true encouragement because she knows me better than anybody else other than my dad. And she's seen in me the type of person that I am, the way that I connect with people, and that's been like definitely the guiding spirit behind everything that I've done. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah.
Yeah, no, it really does. I feel like we recently had a conversation with another filmmaker on the podcast named Barrett Bergen. We were interviewing him regarding he made a shoestring feature, and that's a big part of what we talk about, obviously here at Feature Filmmaker Academy. But he talked a lot about that. He like kind of at the end, he kind of made it clear, like he said, it doesn't really matter what it is that you're doing, but in terms of your faith or your whatever, he said, I have to give credit where it's due. He says, I definitely believe in, these are his words, basically paraphrased, that he believes in the value of
Higher
appealing to a
power.
higher power.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. In the sense of prayer or meditation or whatever that is. He says that taking that time to appeal to that higher power when you're working, which I think for you is, you're describing these values and collaborating with your mom. I mean, when you say that, collaborating with your mom, I, what what does that look like? Is it like phone calls? Is it getting into the nitty gritty, or is it just like a personal relationship that informs you as a person?
yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything. I'm always eager to much more in the past, like I would use her as like a sounding board for
Mm,
ideas and like a creative partner in that sense where she was like, all three kids were outside of the house, like had left the house or didn't live in the house anymore, so like she had a lot of free time, I guess. So she was always just very willing to give feedback on things.
mm.
And so when I started pitching and writing, I had a lot of just like uncertainty and questions, so she helped guide and inform a lot of those decisions. And yeah.
No, that's
Wow,
really
it's
cool.
beautiful. Yeah.
I know that there's a lot of filmmakers who've their spouse has been that person. I mean, Alfred Hitchcock worked closely with his spouse even after she stopped collaborating on the projects themselves, like in accredited fashion. She played that sort of a role where it was there were every decision was basically run by her in an
Right.
almost executive sense. But these are the people that don't usually get credit, but there's this depth of creative value that they offer artists. I think it's really important to have those people. Stephen
Yeah.
King talks about his wife being that person that he writes all of his first drafts for himself and all of his second
Yeah.
drafts for his wife before he sends it to editors and publishers. And so that's really interesting.
I do think it's so valuable for creatives to have somewhere to go like that, somebody who's a safe relationship, whether that's God or a spouse or a good friend
or a parent.
Yeah, or a parent. I love that. And I think that what you've shared today has been so helpful and is so relatable to many people, Jon. I think just to wrap this up, because we're getting close on time here, if there are other people who are feeling the way that you have before, like there's something missing, or even that they have had a level of success and there's still something empty or that they're seeking for in their life, or a lack of joy, what would you say to that person who might be feeling that way at this time?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is just finding a quiet space and sitting there and just listening, seeing what comes up, and sitting with the pain, sitting with whatever comes up, and just listen to that and follow that. Whether that's, some people call it God, some people call it their inner voice, their intuition, whatever it is. I know, I didn't do that for so long because I was always spun up, like reacting to everything. So I never prioritized stillness.
Mm.
But that would be the first thing I would say for sure.
I had the opportunity once of editing a documentary for a woman who interviewed the shipmates of her father who served on the USS James C. Owens in World War II. And it was interesting. One of the shipmates touched on something that you just mentioned, which he said that when he would take night watch sometimes, and he said that he remembers hours of staring at the reflection of the moon running across the ocean.
Wow.
And he said, you'd like to just try and keep thinking about your escapades on your last leave, or like the girls you were with or whatever. And he said, but eventually you run out of things, you run out of frivolous things to think about. And then you have to start to question yourself and the meaning of your existence. And you have to start to like reflect. And he says he says, my biggest concern is that young people don't have that anymore. They don't have any time to reflect. So I don't know. I've always remembered that. And what you're saying, I think, really strikes that same chord, in the sense that there is value in that. I think sometimes we always think of like exchanging our time for some sort of value that we can measure. And
Right.
but there's value in stillness, so I really do like that, which I think you made some high-speed cinematography on your Vimeo page that you put to a meditation exercise. I actually looked up that guy. What's the name of that filmmaker? Or he was on Broadway.
Bert Salzman.
Bert Salzman. Yeah, I would recommend anyone to check that video out and check out Bert Salzman's meditation courses. I thought that was really neat how you did that. I'd never heard of him until I saw that piece that you did, but it's actually pretty effective. I was like, I don't take much time to meditate in that particular sense, like a very guided meditation, I should say.
Right.
And it was a lot more beneficial than I think I would have assumed. So I was humbled in that sense. I thought it was actually really enjoyable and helpful. So
Yeah, I love that. I think today we live in an age where there's like so much media and so many places to turn. Most people have them right there in their pocket on their phone, that
Right.
a lot of us don't know how to process our emotions or sit with them and feel them or face them, because it's just so much easier to distract ourselves with work or with the phone or with whatever it is. And that's such an easy thing to turn to. So I do think that's really helpful advice, to just take some time for stillness, for thought, put those things aside, and maybe even force yourself to confront those things that we're afraid to face or to feel.
Yeah. And just knowing that it's okay, that like if there is, pain or darkness or whatever, that's, as far as I believe, it's just part of being human, and acknowledging that and not trying to just swipe it under the rug is a really empowering thing to do, for me at least.
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
John, have you read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl?
Yes. Yeah, years ago, but yeah, it's still on my bookshelf. I flip back to it here and there.
Yeah, I read that a few years ago and was like, ah, why did it take me so long to get around to reading this book? But in his logotherapy stuff, he talks about an American logotherapist who directly addresses that this is a not exclusively an American problem, but pointedly it's more prevalent what you just described, which is this that Americans we sometimes feel shame for feeling sad or like we our
Mm,
negative emotions we almost feel like we shouldn't be having them and
right.
which from his sort of being a Jewish man who's a Ford death camp survivor and growing up in Europe and everything I guess he's like there's maybe a smaller degree of like acceptance like when you're feeling bad like it's like this is part of like the drama of the human experience and the human story like that's just what there's this acceptance of it whereas in America it's like well if I was doing better or if I was good or if I was whatever complete I wouldn't be feeling these things and it's like no that just like layers negative emotion upon negative emotion like it like makes you feel bad for feeling bad and like and how that's I don't know that's so yeah it, it's and at the same token it can like you can feel good about feeling bad not in like
Yeah.
a I want to feel this way but like in actually a close friend of mine actually one of Anna's cousins recently talked to me at a family reunion and said talking about a significant tragedy that had happened to him he's a young man and saying I felt sad but I could tell that the sadness was making me grow in a way that
Wow.
like I wouldn't have traded the experience, even though like if the power was put in my hand, it'd be like impossible for me to not,
Right.
undo that terrible thing. But I'll never do it. Like, like I can't. And I'm kind of glad that I can't because I can tell that I wouldn't become the person that I'm supposed to be becoming if I wasn't experiencing this sadness. So you can almost feel happy about the sadness, which I thought was a
Oh, yeah.
sort of this paradoxical statement that made so much sense. I can relate to that, I think, in a personal way. So,
I love that. It's like yeah, it's I mean that was like the unique thing about like going into experiencing like a really bad depression for me is like yeah, it was extremely painful and not comparing depression to like what your friend or your cousin went through, but it's just it's humbling, it's like life has a way of humbling us and if we I think if we listen to that it opens up so much empathy. Like it's crazy. Like after the depression happened, I was like, wow, like there's millions of people living with this every day,
Mm.
and like wow, like and just being able to like sit with those more people, and like hold space for more people that are going through huge challenges because like I was never a depressed kid in this specific example, like I had no idea what depression was until I was like slam dunked into it, and now I'm just like okay, there's a lot more going on here. The world is
Yeah.
a lot bigger than me, kind of thing, which
yeah,
is I love that. Like that's how I interpret what you said about the sadness is like, yeah, it's terrible and sad in one way, but another way, it's like just brings us so much deeper into, you know, our connections with others and God and the world at large, which is really cool.
Yeah, yeah, I do a lot of coaching. So when I'm working with people as a coach, we talk about processing emotions and how emotions are like someone knocking on your door. And there's a few different responses. You can answer the door and let them in, or you can ignore it and hope they'll go away. And when you
Yeah.
ignore them, they actually grow bigger and more persistent and they don't go away. And
sometimes they knock the door down.
they kind of might start attacking your house from the outside until they can get in. And every time you let an emotion in, it has something to teach you. Like there's a reason why it's coming there, and you'll
Right.
never know what that is until you sit and let them in and listen. And I think sometimes when we're pushing those emotions away for too long, it can feel like that slam dunk into depression you
Yeah.
talked about, where it's just like the whole house just collapsed, like because I was
Yes.
pushing this all away for too long. So yeah,
Well-
and hopefully we can create safe spaces for people to feel like they can think out loud or bounce ideas off or understand what they're going through and process their own experiences. I definitely feel like you are doing that in the community you've created. And I feel that, with my own clients as well in our coaching meetings, that's a place they're able to go and really open up and work through things and figure out what's meaningful to them and how to reach the goals they want and what they actually need. And I definitely feel like you've done that on a community level that is really impressive, where people feel safe to open up and to be vulnerable. And again, we're at time, but if you would just, maybe we can end with you sharing how people might join this community or what it's about, and we'll link that in the show notes as well for anyone who might need a space like that to enter in.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for the kind words about it. It's been a cool, just a cool little journey. And so, yeah, I guess as far as learning about the community, so the way that we've been describing it is it's a community where filmmakers prioritize wellness and growth. For me, I think of it for myself, it's kind of like group therapy for filmmakers. I mean, that's the best, most effective conversations we have are that, you're like putting your vulnerabilities out there and learning like the truth of what it's actually like. And I think that's where like the real power lies, like you were mentioning a bit. So yeah, it's wearevariable.com. If you have any questions, you can always email me at hello@wearevariable.com. And yeah, that's all I got for my promotion.
I'm sold.
Well, it's really a cool community. I haven't been as directly involved as Anna, but I've definitely investigated the whole thing, and I think that it's something that's needed.
Thank you.
And there are definitely conversations that they happen, but they happen more on like we're all complaining about this sort of level. And so I think it's really good that there's a constructive space where it's like we're all actually addressing this and having it's a more productive space, I think. So it's exciting to me to see that there's a few people, including yourself, that are finally creating different unique solutions or resources, at least, and tools for something that's really common, I think, in all industries, but especially in the film industry.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's awesome. Well, I don't know if you have any last questions, Anna.
I think that's it for now. Just a big thank you so much for joining us on the podcast and for your insights, Jon. Do you have any last words or thoughts?
There's a really amazing quote that I think would be nice to end on.
Yeah, great.
It says, it's by the French philosopher, his name's Blaise Pascal, and it says, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And whether if people believe it to be literally true or spiritually interpreted, I just absolutely love that quote and come back to it all the time. So
it reminds me of, oh my goodness, I guess Bible school is failing me. Elijah or Elisha, when he he witnesses the earthquake, and God was not in the earthquake, and he witnesses the fire, and he wasn't in the fire, and then there was a still small voice, and that's where he found him. And have you seen the movie? Have you seen the movie Sound of Metal?
Yes. Oh gosh, the ending of that movie is exactly right.
Yes, yeah, stillness. That's where the kingdom of God is in those moments of stillness. That movie, the way that it opens and the way that it closes,
oh my gosh,
is some of the greatest contrast I think you could possibly evoke. That was a far more profound movie than I was expecting going into it, and I think
me too.
I need to revisit that one a couple dozen more times, I think. So that was great work.
I do too. It also reminds me of like the ending of Boyhood. Did you see Boyhood?
No, not yet.
Oh man. Oh my gosh. I feel like you would absolutely love that. I mean, maybe not. That some people hate it, but some people love it. But the ending of that film is a similar sentiment to, yeah, being
Oh,
still.
we'll have to check it out.
No, we'll have to watch that one. Well, I think that
Definitely,
if based on this conversation, if there's anything, Jonathan, that I'd love you to walk away from this podcast episode is to go watch Late Spring by Ozu.
I already wrote it down.
Oh, great. Great. Yeah, no, there's a great moment. I mean, that ending is also really thought-provoking, and there's some just beautiful, simple, super meditative way that it's not just the film, it's the way he makes films. You know, it's not just the story, it's the experience of sitting and watching it. It's quite challenging for some people who don't like maybe the stillness, but it's like a meditation session almost. It's so patient and yet not. And that was something I was going to say right at the beginning of the podcast that I didn't really say, which is that I've tried to make stuff that's that patient, like Ozu, you know, really still, quiet frames. And I often find myself like, there's nothing going on here. But when I watch your stuff, People's Park and some of your other documentary work, I'm like, how is it possible? Like, there's something different about it, where there's always something actually interesting happening in the frame, even though it seems like nothing is happening. Maybe it's because I'm outside of it, you know. But I feel like there's just a degree of thoughtfulness that I've watched some of my maybe whatever I would consider my slower work, and been like, oh, this feels like I think there's something really interesting happening, but maybe there really isn't. And anyway, that's something I really admire in both your work and Ozu, which is good company, Jon, to be in. So.
Oh, gosh. So. Yeah, I just got the Criterion channel, and I have a feeling this is on there.
There's not enough Ozu on the Criterion channel, in my opinion, and it's a shame because. Anyway, but I could be wrong. There might be a few, but I was shocked when I was like, "Whoa!" I thought that his like whole filmography would be on there. But BFI really loves him, and they have a subscription. There's a subscription for everything now.
Yeah. There is.
So
yeah, I'm definitely gonna, because I'm in the process of like developing some more films, and I want to take more of this type of approach, but in more like a narrative setting. So
yeah,
I'll look at this for some inspiration. I'll probably rip off his films.
It's a good one. Well, and while you're at it, check out Eda, KORE-EDA. And
did you tell me about him, Anna?
I did, yeah.
Oh, did you, Anna? Oh, yeah. No, he's sensationally amazing. And check out your local library. That's actually the only place I can find these movies. Is our local library. So they have ours at least had a pretty good international cinema selection. So anyway. Well, that's maybe past the outro of the podcast.
All good.
I think everyone who listens to the podcast already knows that we really like Koreeda and Ozu, so it's old news anyway.
And we like to ramble sometimes
about films. Thanks so much, Jon. We appreciate you. Thanks so much for your time.
Of course. Thank you both, and I'm sure we'll connect sometime down the line for sure.
Yeah, we'll see you around.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, you'll love the Feature Filmmaker Academy, a program designed to teach anyone how to finance and finish a feature film.
There are many resources teaching you how to do a great job, but what they don't teach you is how to get the job in the first place.
You cannot have a career making feature films until you've made at least one. Anyone can make a feature film using our proven model.
It's risk-free. If you follow all the steps in the program, you'll finance and finish a feature film, or we'll give you your money back.
Learn more at invisiblemansion.com/feature filmmaker or click the link in the show notes.
If you find this free resource valuable, we'd really appreciate it if you leave us a review or share it with another filmmaker. We'll see you next time. Bye.